Welcome to the 700 Club. President Biden is increasing the pressure on Russia in hopes of deterring an invasion of Ukraine. He's even considering putting personal sanctions on Russia's Vladimir Putin.
The president is also suggesting that U.S. troops might be on their way to Europe sooner rather than later. Meanwhile, France is set to host diplomatic talks today with Germany, Ukraine, and Russia on the escalating crisis. Charlene Aaron has the story.
NATO allies France and Germany hope the high-level meeting will broker a diplomatic solution and avert a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
If he were to move in with all those forces, it would be the largest invasion since World War II. It would change the world.
With 100,000 Russian troops along Ukraine's border, French President Macron will talk personally with Russia's Vladimir Putin by phone on Friday in an attempt to rein in the crisis. This as the U.S. continues to send military aid to Ukraine, including anti-tank and bunker-busting missiles. The acting U.S. ambassador to Ukraine confirming that support.
The Ukrainians are ready and capable of defending their country, and we will be there to help them.
President Biden also warning the movement of 8,500 U.S. troops on standby could come sooner rather than later.
Well, it depends. What would lead to that is what's going to happen, what Putin does or doesn't do. And I may be moving some of those troops in the nearer term, just because it takes time.
The president also considering personal sanctions on Putin himself if Russia invades, on top of other severe economic and trade sanctions. On CBN's Faith Nation, Michael O'Hanlon of the Brookings Institution said it's not clear what actions the U.S. can take against Putin.
I'm not quite sure what President Biden is alluding to. I think he'd be better off talking about how we could develop a plan to wean Western Europe off of Russian energy and accelerate that transition as a response to any major aggression. I think that would be a more credible kind of threat.
The U.S. is making plans to keep Europe supplied with natural gas if Russia turns off its pipelines. President Biden is meeting with Qatar's leaders early next week to discuss sending some of their gas reserves to Europe. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
There seems to be some kind of giant chess game, and what exactly is the end game for Russia? If they invade, you're talking about the largest humanitarian crisis we've seen. The mass migration of people leaving Ukraine would absolutely overwhelm Europe. But then in the wake of all of that, Russia would have to be prepared for a guerrilla war that would last for decades. They had experience with that in Afghanistan, just as the United States had experience with that in Afghanistan. And would it be the same outcome? Maybe they have reliance that they have overwhelming military force and would make a lightning strike. But at the same time, the Ukrainians don't want to be under Russian rule and will actively resist it and resist it for a very long period of time. This is definitely a time to pray for our country, to pray for our administration, pray for our State Department, pray for our ambassadors, and especially pray for our president, that he would have unusual wisdom in dealing with the crisis. In other news, Omicron parties, young people getting together to catch the virus. It's a desperate attempt to develop immunity that doctors are giving a big thumbs down. Medical reporter Lori Johnson brings us this report on the latest effects of the Omicron surge that's crippling our frontline healthcare workers.
Dealing with the double dose of Omicron patients combined with a dire shortage of hospital workers is slamming hospitals nationwide.
This is a bad time to have anything else going on, whether it's a heart attack or a stroke or needing an elective surgery that has some urgency. People are overwhelmed. I mean, resources are really stretched right now.
Workers struggling with a crisis that's dragged on for 2 years now.
I feel the frustration that so many people have, that just feels like we're going to be here forever and it'll always be like this. And if I wasn't a believer, I think there could be a sense of hopelessness there.
COVID deaths top 2,000 a day, matching Delta levels. Doctors point out Omicron case numbers are 5 times higher than Delta's, meaning if Omicron had been as severe as Delta, we'd be facing upwards of 10,000 deaths a day.
I think the worst combination would be something as contagious as Omicron, but as virulent and deadly as Delta. it could be catastrophic.
New CDC research shows that while Omicron evades immunity in some people, those vaccinated and boosted are 90% less likely to land in the hospital if they become infected.
When we look in the ICU at the really significant infections, it's a very low number of vaccinated patients in our ICU.
Still, Omicron can sideline those who manage to avoid the hospital.
So when we say a mild illness, you might be very, very sick for 8 or 9, 10 days with one of the worst flus that you've had in quite some time, but it's not severe enough to go to the hospital. That's when they're saying it's mild, or they're not meaning it's just the sniffles and you move on.
And what about reports of so-called Omicron parties? That's where people believe by getting together to catch Omicron, they can recover quickly and get on with their lives. Doctors give that idea a major thumbs down.
I see lots of really, really young people, even as young as 30, with young families, critically ill, and having to make very tough decisions about care. I would not recommend anybody get the disease to try to develop immunity.
Instead, doctors urge vaccination and caution until this surge is over.
I think the Father doesn't want us to walk in fear. I think he wants us to walk in trust. I hope that this journey for all of us is one of trust. Also, though, I would say I don't think trust looks like callousness or recklessness. I think there's a sense of responsibility and loving others that we need to keep at the forefront of the decisions and things we do.
As to what might follow Omicron?
Only the Lord knows that, because we don't know what is coming next.
Meanwhile, there's growing controversy over mask mandates. In New York, a judge reinstated Governor Hochul's mandate on schools and businesses just hours after a lower court struck it down. And here in Virginia, the state Supreme Court is expected to hear arguments soon on Governor Youngkin's ban on mask mandates in schools. Gordon.
Well, Lori, tell us about the FDA's latest ruling. They're saying that using antibodies to treat COVID isn't approved anymore. Why the change?
Well, the CDC says 99% of all COVID cases are Omicron, and 2 monoclonal antibodies have been shown to be ineffective against Omicron. That's according to the manufacturers themselves, Regeneron and Eli Lilly, as well as peer-reviewed published studies. The AMA, the American Medical Association, supports the FDA. Doctors say that giving drugs that don't work can be harmful to patients psychologically by giving them false hope. But also, these are infusions for 1 hour, and there can be injection site and allergic reactions. The good news, Gordon, is these 2 drugs are going to be put on the shelf, and if they show that they are effective for future variants, they'll be brought back into circulation.
Okay, well, let's focus on treatment as opposed to vaccination. So what treatment does the FDA now recommend?
Well, there is one monoclonal antibody treatment that still works. The other 2, as we just discussed, really don't. This one is made by GlaxoSmithKline, and there are 3 antivirals that have been approved by the FDA. 2 of them are pills, and the other one, remdesivir, remember that? That used to be only used in hospitals, but a couple of weeks ago, the FDA authorized its use in outpatient settings. It is an infusion for 3 days in a row. All of these drugs are in short supply and are generally reserved for highest risk patients.
All right, well, talk about the future. Are we going to see new variants, or do you see COVID actually fading after Omicron?
Well, there's already been a brand new subvariant of Omicron called BA2. This has been detected in 40 different countries, including the United States. There are only 3 cases here in the U.S. so far, and it's unclear whether this is more or less virulent or contagious than the original Omicron strain. So it's This virus, Gordon, has been very unpredictable, and that sometimes scientists are wondering if that is because the origin of this virus is unknown. If, for example, it was manufactured in a lab by human beings in a Chinese lab, that might explain some of the unpredictable nature. Of course, we don't know what the origins are for sure. There is no smoking gun, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing to that.
All right, well, tell us about the future then. Are we looking at booster shots from now on and trying to stay ahead of the latest variant? Is that the future?
Well, Pfizer actually is testing a brand new vaccine that is targeted for the Omicron variant. And so a lot of people are wondering, a lot of folks have already gotten a second booster shot. These are people who got their initial booster shot 5-6 months ago and are wondering, are we going to get boosters every 4, 5, 6 months? Or will there be, for example, an annual vaccine? It's looking like there will be an annual vaccine, and many scientists are expecting this pandemic to soon become an endemic, more like the annual flu.
All right. Well, Lori, thanks for the insights and thanks for the report.